As the world becomes highly globalized and the increasing interconnectedness and interdependence of peoples and countries accelerate the movements and exchanges of goods and services, capital, technologies, and cultural practices, the developed and the developing countries are presented with various opportunities in different aspects, including social, political, and cultural. However,
To my fellow Filipinos, today we face the very grave threat of the novel coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19.
there are always two sides to a coin. While globalization does proliferate development through worldwide connection, the processes of this temporal and spatial compression engender intended and unintended consequences perilous to everyone. Now that we are almost at the peak of becoming completely and utterly globalized, often reaching some of the most remote areas in the planet, it is deemed that the futures of globalization is here. The future of globalization is now. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Maria Helena Angela J. Serrano from the Group 8. My groupmates and I were assigned to report the bioeconomic globalization, infectious disease, and organ transplants, as well as the gerontological revolution. Let's first start the discussion on the definition of bioeconomy. According to the White House's Bioeconomy Blueprint, a bioeconomy is based on the use of research and innovation in the biological sciences to create economic activity and public benefit. Basically, it maneuveres around innovations in biological sciences to stimulate the economic growth of developed countries. With the advent of globalization, these biological developments have spread worldwide and engendered various consequences we will discuss today. The first consequence of bioeconomic globalization processes is the spread of infectious diseases. While plagues were spread by migration and trade in previous centuries, diseases remained relatively specific to geographical niches. This is because there are minimal flows of people and animals across national boundaries. With the growth of world tourism and trade, however, the global risk of infectious disease has increased rapidly. There is a widespread anxiety about developing a variety of new conditions that are difficult to diagnose and classify, complex in their functions and diffusion, and resistant to conventional medical treatment, meaning the diseases that are emerging are becoming highly infectious and detrimental. The list of such conditions now include the eruption of hantavirus, cholera, toxic shock syndrome, Legionnaire's disease, AIDS, and one of which we are all familiar with is, of course, SARS. In the earliest years of the 21st century, this was a generated concern called the coming plagues, as one of the features of globalization. In light of today's realities, we can highly associate this subtopic with the pandemic that we're currently experiencing. The severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, or COVID-19, is a consequence of the rapid worldwide movement of people across national boundaries, due to technological advancements and the development of our transportation, the aftermath of modernity. In the reading material, the author cited Garrett, who in 2005 stated that many health agencies were then predicting that a world pandemic is highly likely in the event of avian flu, spreading through the human population within the next decade, and that such an outbreak would kill between 180 and 300 million people. The economic consequences and social disruption of a pandemic would be enormous. The crisis resulting from a pandemic would require determined and concerted international cooperation. But there was little preparedness then. And lo and behold, a decade and a half after, a global pandemic indeed took us by surprise. The COVID-19 has killed millions of people worldwide. Every day, the cases uncontrollably rise, not to mention the different variants that have emerged. Because of globalization, we are all confined in our homes because an infectious disease stemmed from Wuhan, China. The globalization of infectious disease is produced by the rapid transportation of people and goods, population density, and growing dependency of intensive livestock production. The transportation of animals and animal products has created ideal conditions for transporting fungi, viruses, and bacteria that produce devastating sickness in both human and animal populations.
Organ transplant to modern society is often described as a human industrial complex because the human body can be broken down into parts that in turn become commodities. Social changes have their specific roots in commercial applications of genetic research, but perhaps a more dramatic and emotive illustration of commercialization is the emergence of the world market in kidney sales from poor to rich countries. Critics argue that the organs typically come from women of poor countries and donate them to men in rich societies. So these women do not receive adequate medical support after donation and often suffer from infections and exhaustions. So the cost of drugs to suppress this immune system represents a significant economic burden on recipient families. So basically, these practices raise difficult moral and political questions because families that donate organs clearly need the injection of cash. Such transactions produce, but the exchanges are typically unequal. So given the social inequalities of the existing market, therapeutic cloning would be a significant medical advance and would probably undermine the market for human organs, which in turn will unlikely help the third world societies. So the tension between the legal and economic regulations are particularly problematic in the sales of human organs. The technology of the internet promotes the globalization of the marketing of human bodies, in which made possible through the new reproductive technologies, and presents the greatest challenges to any attempt to regulate the market through the imposition of ethical standards upheld by the law.
The Gerontological Revolution. Conventional gerontology versus the developments in biogerontology and regenerative medicine. The demographic revolution and the graying of populations are worldwide phenomena with significant consequences for the global economy, welfare policies, and defense strategies. Aging populations mean that there are significant shortages in the labor markets of the advanced societies, and the future implications of aging for investment, pensions, and economic stagnation are significant. However, advances in biological sciences have created an expectation that aging could be delayed, if not cancelled. In conventional gerontology, the question about living forever might in practical terms mean living a full life and achieving the average expectation of life. Between the 1960s and the 1980s, the view put forward by biologists was that normal cells had a replicative senescence, that is, normal tissues can only divide a finite number of times before entering a stage of advanced quiescence. Biologists concluded that finite cell division meant that the aging of the whole organism was inevitable. These research findings confirmed the traditional view that human life had an intrinsic and predetermined limit. This biological framework of aging was eventually disrupted by the discovery that some isolated human embryonic cells were capable of continuous division in culture and showed no evidence of a replicative crisis. Certain non-pathological cells or stem cells were capable of indefinite division and hence were immortalized. Stem cell research begins to define the arena within the body that has reserves of renewable tissue, indicating that the limits of biological growth are not fixed or inflexible. The body has a surplus of stem cells capable of survival beyond the death of the organism. With these developments in biogerontology, the capacity of regenerative medicine to expand the natural limits of life becomes a plausible aspect of contemporary medicine. These advances will undoubtedly enhance life expectancy and have significant implications for the shape of the world's population in terms of age structure.
The consequences of enhanced longevity due to gerontological revolution. With the medical innovations and demographic changes, it is no surprise that humans will face some consequences, although in a rapid and radical state. With enhanced longevity, its consequences socially and politically were not given a more serious research. Thus, the social outcomes of new patterns of aging will be revolutionary. Firstly, inequality never perished and may continue to increase, and this might spark up conflicts between social groups, particularly against wealthy aged populations. Moving on, labor markets will be unable to cope with the increasing number of aging survivors, and there will be a major crisis in housing markets. A reason for this is that longevity will only increase pensioners and therefore increasing health costs, making it hard for the economy to thrive. And the more the people, the more shelter must be provided. There will be an increasing dependence on the use of genetically modified food. The reason for this is that if more people will pass through life expectancy, the population may continuously rise, and the demand for food supply increases as well. And since it will be a struggle to keep up with the population expansion, we will run out of resources, and it will be hard for us to provide their basic needs. so a faster growing crop is needed. But as environmental pollution increases, nation states will have to struggle to maintain natural resources to support their own population. With global warming and other problems the world is facing, resources might deplete faster as usual. As more trees are being cut down because of the high demand for wood, we'll lose more than what we can plant. There would also be intergenerational conflicts over resources, in which existing economic crises around pensions and housing would increase. As I said a while ago with my previous statement, the government will struggle to keep the economy stable and growing with the amount of costs needed because of the growing population. If this continues, it might cause the start of wars for resources. If we assume that while the application of genetic sciences could reduce mortality, it would, at least in the short term, increase morbidity as chronic illness and geriatric diseases increase. It means that I think only temporary solutions are being made, that it is not effective for a long time and might worsen the medical condition or disease. Since longevity does not in itself result in greater happiness, elderly populations will be drug independent, as some of us believe that the more dosage of drugs, the more it will impact the health in a negative way. But of course, since the elders depend on it, this may be a good idea that the main driving force in the economy will be genetic research and its applications in pharmaceutical industries, as new or improved drugs will help healthcare and may reduce the cost needed for the population. The prospect of indefinite life will thus raise an acute malnutrition crisis. The economy will increasingly depend on the demand for product, as mentioned a while ago, to manage the chronic illness of a population condemned to live forever. If the population grows much faster than food production, consequences in the end may be faced, such as famine, disease, and war. Endosomatic versus exosomatic instruments. The economic process involves an inevitable degradation and depletion of resources, declining economic growth. Although sustainability is a good solution or possible solution to help mitigate the problem. Following the biologist Alfred Rothka, he noted that humans, like other animals, use their organs to enhance their enjoyment of life. Some animals have wings to fly around. Moreover, all animals are born with these organs that Rothka called endosomatic instruments. Although we humans have poor endowment of endosomatic instruments compared with the powerful tools of some animals, but man is the only creature who uses organs that are not part of his biological constitution. And these are his exosomatic instruments, which are in fact simply capital equipment or things that people use around them to enjoy life. Therefore, the logical situation of human beings has one major problem, namely scarcity and the resulting social conflict over resources, and these were stated by Turner and Rojak. The proposal that we could live forever, even if the means an extra decade for rich nations, can only increase the rate at which resources are depleted and pollution increases, and it would inevitably lead to war. Both statements showed, similar results for the consequences, conflict over resources that may lead to war. And finally, for the conclusion. First, globalization of tourism, transport, and exchange, together with increasing population density, produces environmental degradation and major epidemics that cannot be easily contained. If a pandemic is inevitable under these circumstances, there will be major economic crisis, and the resulting social disruption will further enhance the possibilities of civil and military conflict, like what we are experiencing right now. Second, environmental crisis will become a significant determinant of economic viability of nation states, but it is doubtful whether there are such things as natural disasters. For example, the flooding of New Orleans in 2005 was a consequence of failed levels and inadequate planning, but it is also a consequence of global warming, and the resulting social chaos and collapse of civil order can be taken as one illustration of the social and political disruptions that will flow from further globalization. Third, these environmental changes will increase scarcity and make conflict over water and land more prominent in civil conflict. War and waste will be significant driving features of the futures of globalization. Fourth, The globalization of disease can be best illustrated considering today's realities. The spread of COVID-19 worldwide was a consequence of further globalization. Fifth, while there are forms of social continuity, globalization will make catastrophes more general, immediate, and profound. Sixth, the pandemics of the future, precisely because of the world is interconnected but lacks any effective global governance, will destroy millions of people, undermine whole societies, and threaten civilized life. And for the seventh, in the context of uncontrollable pandemics and famines, we can expect millenarian movements and fantastic cults to flourish once more in the era of global catastrophes. In this respect, the future globalization will resemble not the brave new world of Huxley or that of Orwell in 1984, but the world of Mad Max, with roaming armies of displaced men in search of gasoline, armaments, drugs, where small fortified hamlets of the rich and powerful would seek shelter and secure religious meaning from their cults and prophets. Lastly, these new war conflict zones are the outposts of empire that will drain away the resources of democratic societies and erode the civil liberties of their citizens. It is unlikely that the juridical revolution can contain such pressing global anarchy. That is it for our report. Thank you for listening.